So it's great to be here. I want to thank the Center and the Institute. I want to thank Matt and Andrew and Jared. And of course, it is a great privilege to honor the profound and pivotal work of Iain McGilchrist. So thank you very much for this opportunity. So I'm playing with the title of the conference, and the title of my talk is The Metaphysics of Mattering. So what is this mattering we're talking about, and why do we care about it, and why are we using the word mattering? We're all against materialism. So a way to start looking at this is to look at some of the psychological work that's going on right now, a bit of an explosion on what's called meaning in life, not meaning of life. Meaning of life is a particular cosmic proposal. Meaning in life is what keeps you going when you face all the ways in which you fail, you're frustrated, things are futile, other people let you down, you let yourself down, wonder and you wander. What keeps you going? That's what's meant by meaning in life. So a lot of research has been drawn together by the work of Martella and Steger in 2016, and they proposed 3 dimensions of meaning in life. Purpose, you have an overarching goal that you're working towards, and this is what our culture likes to reduce meaning in life to. Purpose, because it's great for capitalism. But there's 2 others at least. Coherence, which is your world can't be absurd. It has to make sense to you. It has to hang together well. And of course, as many people have pointed out, we have a scientific worldview in which we can't explain the humanity that generates science. And so it doesn't hang together, and we aren't in it. We are the whole in the scientific ontology. Significance. This is a mixed thing, and we'll clarify it in a minute. This is a mixture of value and realness. Okay. Now, you'll notice that mattering isn't in that list, but I want to say one thing before we get to mattering, which is the idea that purpose is most important is actually false. Okay, and part of the way in which things are distorted, it's not that purpose doesn't matter, please hear me correctly, but you can't reduce everything to purpose. And this came up in the work of Cousin and Bignales in 2020, in which they provided very good evidence for this 4th dimension, which they called mattering. And they also showed in that experimental work that mattering, sorry for this, matters more than purpose. Now that right away tells you something, right? So what is this meaning in life? Well, they're making use of the excellent philosophical work of Wolf's book, Meaning in, I love this title, it's so appropriate for my talk, Meaning in Life and Why It Matters. And she goes on to argue with a lot of argument that I can't review. It's very careful, very rigorous, that you can't reduce meaning in life to a mastery over your environment, nor, as we might be prone to think, could you reduce it to morality. She gives examples of people who are leading morally admirable lives, but are very lonely. And we have a loneliness epidemic right now. Okay, so what is it? And she says, well, it's a metaphor, and people use this metaphor. They want to be connected to something larger than themselves. But if I chain you to an ocean liner, you don't go, oh. Okay, it's a metaphor. Okay, but what we have to get into, what is the metaphor? And she comes down to this notion of connectedness. Yeah. And I'm going to try and give you a sense of, and these are like diagnostic questions you can ask about in order to sort of measure how much meaning in life you have. What do you want to exist even if you don't? Second, how real is it? Is it really real? Third, how much of a difference do you make to it now? You can answer all 3 of those, you have meaning in life. If one of them is missing, it's reduced. If they're all missing, you're in trouble. You are in trouble because this work is actually convergent with work by Kelly Allen and other people on the psychology of belonging, independently pursued. Belonging is, well, but your sense of belonging. And what she shows, and what a lot of these researchers shows, if you don't have a sense of belonging, you're in trouble. You're in deep trouble psychologically, you're in deep trouble physiologically, you're in deep trouble socially, and you're probably even in trouble economically. Not necessarily, but it's not a zero correlation. what's going on here? Well, think about, first of all, what belonging is. You can think of it like niche construction. This is an idea at the forefront of the cutting edge of biology, and I think biology is the paradigmatic science for the science of mind, not physics. I think that's what's emerging. Not that physics isn't doing cool things, but what's happened is cognitive science, and that's what I practice, has pivoted towards biology. And this, I have a colleague at the University of Toronto, where all good things come from, right? that we have to understand evolution as niche construction. Yes, the organism is being shaped by the environment, but the organism is also shaping the environment. So they are mutually shaping each other. They're participating in a joint process. Okay, that's belonging, that participation in a co-shaping. So let's go back to the meaning in life literature. So Martella and Steger did a further review, taking into account that work on mattering, and they were able to show, they were able to replicate that mattering matters. So I won't do that too many more times. But what they were able to show really, and I think really crucially, is that significance and mattering are actually two sides or two aspects or two dimensions of a shared phenomenon. So let's try and gather all this together, right? What we have is a connectedness to something that is real and valuable, that we fit into, that we belong with, that we belong in, and that belongs to us in some profound way, but not in the egocentric sense. That's what I meant. That's, remember the first question. What do you want to exist even if you don't? So we're moving towards this notion of things shaping each other, conforming together, that ancient notion of knowing, not as representation, but as contact, as the world and the mind shaping each other together. I'm going to use a word now for this connectedness, this belonging, this fitting together, this shaping together. And I'm going to use the word intentionally because of its associations. I'm going to use the word religio, which means connectedness, binding, but it has, of course, religious overtones, and I want that. I want the double entendre. Okay, so let's unpack the metaphors. Let's unpack the metaphors. Meaning, okay, it's a metaphor. You're saying there's something about my life that is like a sentence. A sentence is meaningful. Somehow the parts fit together, and then they fit me and the world together so I can speak the truth. And they're saying there's something like that about my life. And you do this, or you wave your hands like I'm doing, right? So let's remember that and notice how that fits with all these dimensions. It has to fit together. It has to make sense. It has to fit you to the world. Mattering. Another related word, important. What is important to you? Listen to the word import. Matter to you. So this is something that my friend and colleague, and Evan Thompson, if he was here, has of course built an important career around the idea that we are autopoietic beings, and living things are autopoietic. They're not just self-organizing like a tornado. A tornado is self-organizing, but it will go into conditions that destroy it. A paramecium is self-organizing, so it seeks out the conditions that produce, protect, and promote its existence. So it has real needs. Things literally matter to it. Food literally matters to it. Sucrose is relevant to it. Poisons are not, and many things are neutral to it. None of that is in the ontology of standard physics, although we have some excellent people here starting to bend that ontology, and I welcome that. Now, what's interesting is you are a self-making thing. You are always taking care of yourself, and you're doing this biologically. Things are mattering to you, but you're also, your mind is autopoietic. It is growing out of the information you take in. We also, and this is what's important about it, because we're primate mammals. The things are not only relevant to us, mattering to us, but we are also asking ourselves, how am I relevant to you? That arrow, and that's the agapic arrow. How can I participate in making you a self, in helping you become a person? So at all these levels, biological, cognitive, the self, existential, personhood, the cultural level. We are fundamentally autopoetic. There is a continuum. And so the mattering is at all of these levels in all of these ways. Is that okay? Okay, so we have this fact that because you're constantly taking care of yourself, you care about this information rather than that information. Reed Montague said that's the fundamental difference between you and computers. Computers don't care about the information you're processing. You do, because you have precious time and resources in order to zero in on what matters to you. And that, right, that caring, connectedness, fitting in, conforming, I want you to hear all of that when I say religio. Because I'm now just going to keep saying religio rather than all of that. Because I'm running out of time. Okay. Why is religio important? So this has been the core of my work and perhaps my besetting obsession for about 30 years. And so please don't tell me if I'm wrong, because it'll be existentially destroying for me. So the work I've been doing is this notion of what's at the core of general intelligence. Spearman discovered a long time ago that contrary to all of our cultural myths, how you do in math is actually predictive of how you'll do in sports, how you'll do in art. Way above chance, way, way above, reliably, robust. In fact, the single best predictor of most of your outcomes, if I have to get one measure from you to try and predict you, and it oversimplifies you, but if you say you only get one, I want to know the measure of your general intelligence. Okay. It's not sufficient. I'm not saying that. Do you understand what I'm saying, though? It's a powerful, powerful thing. You are a general problem solver. You can solve a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of domains in a wide variety of ways. And even the best of the LLMs, ChatGPT, do not even approximate that yet. What makes you generally intelligent? Well, this is my first premise of my argument. What makes us generally intelligent is the ability to solve meta problems. Meta problems are any problems you have to solve when you're solving any specific problem. How to be an adaptive problem solver. One, which Michael Levin does when he talks about the light cone, is this notion of anticipation. The more you can anticipate the world, the more intelligent you are. That's where you judge your dog more intelligent than a plant, or you judge it more intelligent than a cat. And I don't want to get into the religious arguments about dogs and cats, okay? There's some pretty good evidence that dogs are better problem solvers, but I know. All right, so but let's put all that, the religious dispute, which aside. Okay, so, right, but the thing is, as you open up that light cone, you hit the problem that I focused on, which is the problem of relevance realization. This is, how do you find the information that matters to you? Why is that such a problem? Because the amount of information you could pay attention to in this room right now is astronomically vast. It's combinatorially explosive. It greatly exceeds, right, the number of atomic particles in the universe, all the different configurations of information you could draw from this room. All the information in your long-term memory, all the ways you could combine it, combinatorially explosive. All the possibilities you can consider, especially as the light cone opens up, combinatorially explosive, astronomically vast. All the potential sequences of actions you could perform, combinatorially explosive. And this is like, and get it, you're doing it right now. Right now, right here. And here's what you're not doing. You're not doing something algorithmic. You're not using an algorithm, because algorithms work according to standards of certainty. Logic and math are algorithmic. Right? And don't accuse me of rejecting logic and math. You'll be misrepresenting me. Hear my criticism, though. You can't be comprehensively algorithmic to be certain of what information is relevant, right, that you need. You'd have to check all, or at least a priori, most of the information in this room, and that would be the last thing you did. If you try to be comprehensively logical like Mr. Spock or Mr. Data, you would commit cognitive suicide trying to get out of your bed. Okay? That doesn't mean algorithms don't apply. Please don't mishear me. But relevance realization is not algorithmic. It's neither arbitrary. Penguin. Can I just arbitrarily say things?
Yeah.
I can, but you're going, what? No, what's the connection? Notice the word, right? This is the thing, and this is what bedevils AGI. Relevance realization is neither algorithmic nor arbitrary. It's in between. Aristotle knew this. Okay. So I've been trying to understand that. And this is exactly, by the way, Zach's like, wasn't that talk like a laser beam, right? Zach's talk it was right. These LLMs, they don't do relevance realization. They are parasites on our relevance realization. We organize the data sets using our relevance realization. We structure information access on the internet by our judgments of relevance and salience. We provide the reinforcement of appropriateness to these machines. They are absolute parasites on us. They are not a scientific advance. But if you think parasites can't be dangerous, you're a fool. And what I want you to understand about this relevance realization is how primordial it is. And here's what I'll start moving into convergence with Iain's work. I want you to think of all the ways in which you might think, well, what is it about the mind that generates relevance realization? Here's the principle I'm going to use. If the process I propose actually requires relevance realization, it can't be the ultimate generator of relevance realization. That would just be a circle. So you may think, well, you know what, I build, think about how left hemispheric this is. Remember representation versus presence, right? Well, I build relevance out of how I represent things. Of course. No. John Searle, 1992, The Rediscovery of the Mind. All representations are aspectual. What's an aspect? Out of all the properties that something happens, I select, and I don't look at them all. It's like a Zen koan. I ignore most of them, and I zero in. So you see this as a pencil, but you could also see it as a weapon. Different kinds of weapon, throwing weapon, stabbing weapon. You can see it. I want to make a mural that has a letter I in it. I want to represent something in California. I want to represent something made by human beings. I want to represent a writing implement. I want to represent something that has to come after 1960s technology. How many true properties does this have? And this isn't what you do. You don't to the one you need. Representations presuppose relevance realization. Therefore, they ultimately cannot be the explanatory origin of relevance realization. I'm not saying you don't use representations. Please don't mishear me. Okay. What about implications? Implication, logic, implication. Well, the problem with, and this goes back to arguments made by both Cherniak and Jerry Fodor, let's take a proposition. It's going to be windy tomorrow. What are the implications? Well, the number of possible implications, possible relationships to other propositions, if you had to check them all, Cherniak did formal proof that you were just checking 138 propositions and you were allowed to make your inferences at the speed of the shift in a valence shell. It would take you the rest of the history of the universe. So that's not what you do. What you do is you determine, and this is what an inference is. Inference and implication aren't the same thing. Inference is a selection from all of the possible implications, the ones that are relevant. So it's going to be windy tomorrow. What does that imply? Well, it depends. It depends. Am I going sailing tomorrow? Am I going skydiving? Am I going for a picnic? Am I flying a kite? Am I staying in and watching movies? Implication to become inference presupposes relevance realization. What about rules? Rules cannot specify their own conditions of application. Let's take a simple rule. Be kind. We all want to be kind, right? So should I be kind to Matt the way I'm kind to Sarah, my partner? That's creepy. Should I be kind to Sarah the way I'm kind to my son Spencer? Oh, that's not going well. Should I be kind to a stranger the way I'm kind to Matt or to Spencer or to Sarah? And what you might think is, well, what I'll do is I'll make rules for how I apply the first rule, and then you're doomed. Because those rules have conditions of application, and so on and so forth, and you get an infinite regress. This is an argument that Brown makes in his book on rationality, and he says it goes back to Wittgenstein clearly, but probably back to Aristotle. This has to terminate in something that's not the application of the rule. It has to terminate in the skill of the judgment of relevance realization. What about prediction? Well, prediction, you're always trying to determine from my sample what the population is. So for Vinny, let's do a sample here. How many people think the California Institute of Integral Studies is a great place? Put up your hand. So the vast majority of human beings think that, okay? So no, because we know it's sampling bias. The problem is there's two kinds of sampling bias. One is I can miss something in my sample that should be found in the population. The other, that's called underfitting. The other is I can take something in my sample like I just did and think it applies to the population. That's called overfitting. And here's the problem. There's no algorithmic solution to that because they're in a trade-off relationship. If I try to reduce misses by becoming more sensitive, I make more mistakes. And if I try to get rid of my mistakes by becoming less sensitive, I miss more. And you say, well, how do you decide? It depends how relevant in your context a miss or a mistake is. What about formalization itself, being a formal system? Got a paper this close to being published right now. It's with Johannes Jaeger, Anna Riddell, Alex Vervaeke, Dennis Walsh, who I've already mentioned, and myself about naturalizing relevance realization. And here's the gist of it. You can't formalize the process of formalization. This is like the deep thing underneath it all. Like the world of problems is divided into two kinds of problems. And I think this maps, I've talked to Iain about this at one point, onto left and right. We can talk about that. But anyways, in the problem-solving literature that I work in, there are well-defined problems. This is when the problem, like for you, 24 times 3. Relevance realization has been done. You know what kind of problem it is. It's a multiplication problem that tells you, oh, what I should do. You know what the relevant operations are. Singing is irrelevant. Right? You know what the results should be. It should be a number. No, look at the astonishingly beautiful picture of a platypus. Doesn't work. You haven't solved the problem. Okay? Now, that's a well-defined problem. Here's an ill-defined problem. Go on a successful first date. I have been in the wonderful, horrible world of dating multiple times. And you know it's an ill-defined problem because your friends give you useless advice. I'm straight, so I'll tell you from a straight perspective. Look into her eyes, but not too much. Laugh at her jokes, not too often. Ask questions, but not too many. The only point of this advice is so later they can tell you if you screw up, I told you so. And now, here's the thing you got to know. Most real-world problems are ill-defined problems. Taking notes in a lecture, participating in a conversation, knowing how close you should stand to somebody at a funeral in Toronto is an ill-defined problem. You didn't go to standing school. Okay? The problem of formalization, of creating a formal system is an ill-defined problem. Once you're in a formal system, you can move around and solve well-defined problems. But getting into the formal system is itself an ill-defined problem. And if you try and say you can formalize it, you get another infinite regress. Have I done enough to show you this? What I'm trying to show you is these things that, we've been talking about that the left hemisphere glorifies. I'm not saying the left hemisphere is completely absent of relevance realization. I'm saying it can't ground itself. And what I'm using is strictly logical, analytic arguments to show the bloody left hemisphere that it can't ground itself. So, I think what at the heart of all of this, and this goes right to what Richard said, is that this whole thing, this whole framework is one big performative contradiction. It's presupposing it's presupposing that its behavior captures relevance realization when by its own arguments, it can't be. Now remember, my proposal to you is this, that religio, that meaning in life is that relevance realization. Do you see why it's so important to you? If you don't have relevance realization, you're not a cognitive agent at all. If you're not solving that meta problem, forget about trying solving any of your other problems. Now, I want to point to the astonishing work of Catherine Pickstock, and she makes this fantastic argument that all of the divisions that have been given to us by modernity have broken down by this same performative contradiction. Kant's beloved analytic synthetic distinction, destroyed by Quine. Is-ought, destroyed by Casebeer. Fact value, destroyed by Putnam. Is relevance a fact or a value? It's both, it's neither. Okay. All of these theory data, that distinction has broken down, Quine and Duham. We're back to a conformity theory. That's her argument. It's a great book, Aspects of Truth Towards a Religious Metaphysics. Now put this together. We are conforming, remember Nietzsche, right, to a world that is also being shaped by us. We project relevance realization, but then we bind ourselves to it. But the world also calls us. Look, relevance realization is not objective. Is this relevant? You'll tell me it depends. Mm-hmm. Is it just subjectively arbitrary? No, because you can be mistaken. I thought she was angry, but it turns out she was afraid. It's neither subjective nor objective. It's a between. It's a real relation. It's a binding. I've coined a term for that. It's not thrown under you like the subject. It's not thrown against like the object. It's thrown between. It's thrown together. I call it the transjective. Relevance realization is transjective. It's religio. It's binding. It's connectedness. Now that caring, that connectedness, that religio and conformity, you put them together and it means the fundamental grammar of our cognition and the fundamental grammar of reality are co-participating in profound principles of organization. When you look at that, what does that tell you? That tells you that relationality is primordial, like relevance realization is primordial. Notions like information and intelligibility are inherently relational notions. And we judge realness in terms of intelligible information. Now, James Fuller, in his astonishing book, Neoplatonism, Heidegger, and the History of Being, Relation as Ultimate Ground, Relationality as Ultimate Ground, argues that this is actually something that the Neoplatonic tradition, especially it was taken up in Christian Neoplatonism, like the Cappadocian Fathers. Think about how God, the Trinity, inherently relational, love, inherently relational, light, inherently relational, right? Like logos, inherently, right? And he argues that, this is because Aristotle gave us the wrong metaphysics. I praised Aristotle, now I'm going to criticize him. Aristotle said what's ultimately real are substances, not stuff. He means individually existing things, like the subject of a sentence, and properties, like the predicate of a sentence, belong to these things. So reality is structured the way subject, predicate, language, and logic are structured. The problem with that, the devastating problem for Aristotle, is you can't get relations out of substances. This is Fuller's argument. Does the relation belong? Is it a property of the substance? No, because then the substance could have the relation on its own. Is it an action of the substance? No, because it could perform the action on its own. Is it a connection? Oh no, but that's a relation. You have to invert it. The relata emerged from the relationality. You've probably heard that here. This goes to, and so he's Neoplatonism. Here's from Zen, Nishida. Nishida argues there's a fundamental contradiction in Aristotle. Aristotle says the most real things are individually existing things, substances, but all knowledge is predication. All knowledge is categorization. When I say red is a color, I'm putting it into a universal. I'm putting it into a category. And that's a problem. Because how can I have categorical knowledge of something that's non-categorical? The individually existing substance. This was the profound problem that emerged in medieval scholasticism. We all poo-poo nominalism and like dualism. Yes, but why nominalism? Why did it emerge? It emerged because they realized the contradiction between Aristotle's epistemology and his ontology, and they made a choice. We'll keep his ontology and we'll throw out his epistemology. There are no universals. They're only in the mind. And then as soon as you do that, the mind has all the real patterns. Out there doesn't, and therefore the mind becomes a different thing from out there. They don't conform. There has to be representation. They're different substances. Dualism emerges. And then you get contradictions in dualism, and so you collapse into materialism, in which all that exists are individually existing material objects. That's why. It goes back to a problem at the core of thinking that subject, predicate, logic, and remember, logic can't grasp reality, it's an algorithm, is our best disclosure. When you give that up, when you move to relationality being the primordial ground of being, then there's the potential for you to understand it. And I mean, like in conformity, bind yourself to it in what my fellow Canadian, oh Canada, Schellenberg calls, and he's an atheist, by the way, he calls the triple transcendent. Is it ultimately real? Remember the meaning in life things. Is it ultimately real? Yes, but is that enough to be sacred? No, it has to be ultimately good. This religio, you're connected to the ultimate good. Why? Because it makes all judgments of truth, goodness, or beautiful possible. It is an ontonormativity. Is it ultimately transformative? Yes, you get into relationship to this and you have to be transformed by conforming to something that exceeds your grasp by definition and exceeds your attempts to get cognitive closure on it by logic and speech. It's most real, it's most good, and it's most salvic. It saves you, it transforms you. That's the sacred. That's the sacred. And that's the metaphysics of matter. Thank you very much for your time and attention.